So tell me about your sort of personal liberation of becoming a writer, leaving Zimbabwe, and what that was like.
Well, I left Zim in 1995. I left to study. I didn't leave for political economic reasons at all. I left when I was 23 because I wanted to do a postgraduate degree. So I came to Europe. I studied in Austria, then I studied here in England at Cambridge. And then I just stayed because I became specialized in an area called international trade law, where I could really only practice it in Washington, D.C., Brussels, or Geneva. So I ended up finding a job in Geneva, and I've just been there for the last 10 years. So it wasn't really a flight. Leaving Zimbabwe for me wasn't, it wasn't a flight or anything like that. It was just leaving for career reasons and that's why then I stayed in Europe for career reasons.
And then it's had this wonderful, result, which
it's had this wonderful result that I've really been free to be more critical and more objective, I think, than many writers in Zimbabwe can be. Not because they don't have the courage to be critical, but they just don't have the financial security to allow themselves to sort of focus fully on writing.
So that culture that sort of supports a literary culture.
So that's the thing. Liberty, and also liberty, I think, has a financial aspect to it as well.
Of course, yes. I think you've got to have that hinterland. You've got to have that sort of support that allows you to express that kind of freedom.
Yeah.
And you're rare. You're giving voice to a kind of Zimbabwean literary tradition, or the beginning one. Is that true to say?
No, I wouldn't say that, because I think I am I'm becoming rather part of a literary tradition that's always been there.
Yeah.
It's just that there have not been many writers writing about this particular crisis in the last 10 years. But there were many writers who wrote about the liberation struggle. There were many writers who wrote about sort of our early efforts at building and forging a nation in the 80s. Writers like Charles Mungoshi, Tsitsi Dangarembwa were very critical of sort of patriarchal society. Writers like Shima Chinojka. And I think what my generation of writers is now trying to do is to interrogate that whole nation-building myth. Were we really building a nation? Or was it simply that we were imposing a monolithic view of what Zimbabwe was supposed to be about? So I wouldn't say that I'm starting a new tradition in any sense, but I'm sort of joining and already.
Yes, I put that rather badly, but I mean, there's a kind of you're a new generation,
it's
I think, and
you're
definitely the next phase.
Yeah.
And so on that, when democracy does return to Zimbabwe, when hopefully soon, there's a kind of sustaining literature which will help another generation
I hope so,
to think about liberty, to think about freedoms.
I hope so. I mean, I really look forward to the day when, as a writer, you can just, be whatever you want to be. If you want to support a particular party or not, you can do that without somebody asking why you feel you have to do this. It's interesting because I saw a comment on one of the Zimbabwean blogs today saying, this Petina Gappah, why can't she be more positive about Zimbabwe?
Right. Yeah.
And somebody responded and said, well, if you want people to be positive about you, you have to be positive.
Sure, yes.
But I think it's criticism will always come. But I think the disturbing criticism that many Zimbabwean writers get is, why don't you write nice things about the country? But I don't think that's even a relevant question for a writer. I think a writer should write the truth that he or she sees.
Precisely, and that's the privilege of being a writer.
Precisely, yeah.
Do you? There's a sort of almost a sort of backing away from the belief of freedom and liberty in the West, and there's been a betrayal. I think things like Guantanamo Bay perhaps is the most sort of striking example of that. But even in Western societies, the idea of liberty has become less important. Do you think that has a knock-on effect, not just in Zimbabwe, but other countries around the world? Or
I think it definitely does, because this is where many of these values emerged. And I think what we're seeing, one thing that really disturbs me is this idea that if somebody is offended by what has been written or said, that is a valid reason to remove the offending material.
Yes.
That really disturbs me, because anyone can be offended by anything. So you are putting all sorts of restrictions on freedom of expression based on very subjective views of what is offensive and what is not.
Yeah.
And to me, that has been a very unfortunate development, particularly in this country, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's one of those things where we're selling ourselves short a bit, and it becomes quite hard to know when you're overstepping the line, when it's something as vague as offence. You don't know what you're doing until you've done it.
Exactly.
So do you think we're taking our freedoms for granted
I
too
think
much?
you
in the West?
absolutely are. I think you are. And this conflation of the offensive and something that's offensive and something that is hate language or hate speech. I think there's too much of an overlap of that. And I really think that you need a wake up call in a sense, because you really are taking it all for granted. Because I certainly I believe in the values of the Enlightenment, and I am very shocked to find that some publications, some newspapers that I believe should stand for those values are actually sort of like shrinking back.
Yeah, they're backing away from things that the fights that they should be fighting.
I think it's Gibson House, this publisher that published The Jewel of Medina. I think that was an absolutely courageous thing to do. But the fact that I'm saying it's courageous, it just shows you what was wrong in that situation.
Yeah, what the state we're in now. Yeah,
exactly. Because
do you think, perhaps because we take it for granted that people coming from Zimbabwe or other countries which have been under tyranny, do you think that you have something to tell us about liberty?
I think so.
That we should prize it more?
I think we should prize it more, and I think you really need to look at countries and societies where that liberty is not available and where that liberty is constrained, and then you will see just what it is that you have that is so valuable.